That was awesome. Thanks, Jeff. When I was deciding on who to pick to, sorry, that was way too fast paced. To intro me, it sort of felt like picking your best man for your wedding. You don't quite know what they're going to say, and you hope they'll say something great, but you're a little afraid of what might happen. But that was awesome, so thank you. Anyway, for a lot of you who I've not met before, my name is Mark. I work on the B2C team and work on the personality squad. Most days I'm focused on supporting Ken and like the career work that he's doing. This morning I'm here to talk a little bit more about the idea of creativity. And we'll be asking questions like, how can I be more creative? What are some ways I need to grow as a creative? And even how can I get better ideas? To get us started, I'd like to take a step back and define not just what creativity is, but what it is we want to strive after. So on the whiteboards, if you saw it when you walked in, I asked us to write down names of people who inspire us and challenge us with their creativity. When we think of someone who is exceptionally creative, who are we talking about? So here we have names of some famous authors, musicians, artists, designers, filmmakers, creative thinkers, and more. So this is the bar. This is the bar of creativity. These are the people we want to be like, right? Right? Right. So how do we get there? But first, I want to tell a story. I want to tell a story. I'm not sure if this is the exact date, but the date of when I started at Ramsey, about almost 4 years ago now. Who are my contractors in the room? Who here is a contractor right now? Oh wow, okay. Who here started as a contractor but is full-time now? Yeah, there's a small squad of us. Watch out, we're taking over the world. Okay. So, before I talk about that, before I came to Ramsey, I worked at a corporate job, corporate America, and worked there for about 10 years. The company was an industrial wholesale company, which is about as sexy and exciting as it sounds. I would say that during those 10 years, I saw some of the best and the worst of what corporate America has to offer. Part of the worst part of it was a lot of times design felt like it was just a cog in the wheel. Like we weren't really asked for our ideas or to be a part of strategy. It was more like, here, make this thing. There was literally projects that I worked on for 3 or 4 years, and I would raise my hand and be like, hey, I'd love to help plan with that. They'd be like, yeah, that's nice. Stay in your lane. So then fast forward to my first day here as a contractor, where I was working with Kirko and Brad Dennison. We were working on the Teen Entrepreneur Toolbox, which coincidentally is what this symbol's about. And then a few days in, Kirko invites me to a brainstorming meeting about it. And he's like, we're going to go brainstorm and plan what this project is. And I'm like, what? And I think I said something like, I've been here 5 minutes and you want me to come to a brainstorming meeting? And he's like, yeah, you'll bring a good outside perspective. This blew my mind. Inside I played it cool, but outside I played it cool, but inside I was just freaking out and super excited. So anyway, during the meeting, I just kind of went for it. I'm here for a good time, not a long time, let's just do this thing. So I'm just throwing out ideas left, right, and center, probably going a little bit overboard. And then at the end of the meeting, Anthony's in this meeting, who used to be a personality, for those of you who are really, really new. And Anthony walks out and he's like, so you said you're a contractor? And I'm like, yep. Crap, I'm in trouble. And it's this is your first day, kind of? He's like, a lot of contractors end up working here. And just walks out. And I was just ooh, okay. So I tell that story for kind of 3 reasons. One, I just think it's really cool that Anthony kind of predicted the future. 2, just to kind of share that ideas are something that's always been super important to me and is I just love it. If you want to invite me to a brainstorming meeting and I don't even know anything about the project, I'll be there. It is fun for me. But also 3, I wanted to call out, our culture is rare. For designers and creatives and for every person's idea to be valued and respected and heard, that's freaking amazing, people. So I kind of wanted to set the challenge to be do not lose how valuable that is. Take the time to ideate, to come up with ideas and present those ideas. That is important. Every person in this room, your voice is important. Do not lose that. Okay, So as you've seen from the slide title, I'm kind of talking about art and science and creativity. And as I've read about and learned about creativity, it feels like a lot of the different ways you can grow as a creative can kind of be broadly lumped into one of these two categories. Art is more what I would say the squishy side of creativity. It's things like intuition, inspiration, flow, resistance, those kind of things. And then science is the flip side of that, and those are things that are a little more black and white. Things like discipline, constraints, experimentation, putting in the reps. Why does this not scroll? Okay, so let's start with science. Because let me be honest, I hated science growing up. I really hated it. It was my least favorite subject in school, and it was the first subject I ever got a D on a test. And I can say this because I still vividly remember getting back that test result and retreating to the back of the classroom, finding the supply closet, closing the door, and crying. Yep, I was 11 and I was not ashamed. I was just I had never seen a D on a test paper before, and I was like, my life is over. And I kind of still have the report card. I'm not traumatized, I'm over it. I'm totally good. And because of popular request from everybody who heard the talk yesterday, here's a picture of me in 7th grade. Yeah, rocking that Bill Cosby sweater. Yeah. Thanks, Mom. Thanks. Appreciate that. So, anyway, the first category under science is listening. Our minds and our capacity to think about and discover new ideas is limited, right? There's only so much mental space we have. Here at Ramsey, we talk a lot about living with financial margin, right? About having breathing space in our budget and having room to breathe. How are we doing with applying that same wisdom to our mental space? Are we living with mental breathing space? Or are we filling up every day? Oh, whoops, my bad. Or are we filling up every day and every minute with something? If you're like me, it's really, I have to fight the default instinct. Well, that's not supposed to go yet. I have to fight the instinct to occupy my mind at every moment. Checking, replying to text messages, email, listening to podcasts or music's on the drive-in. And so our phones and our laptops and all of the technology we have are obviously great tools for being productive. But if we're not careful, they become such a destructive distraction to what really matters. I have to ask, how are we going to get hit by inspiration if our minds are always occupied with something that's not really as important? What if God has a really great idea he wants to share with you, but he's waiting for you to give him the space to help you put the pieces together and see it? If you're drinking bourbon, or started to, like I have here, you know, it's kind of part of the culture. It's if you didn't like bourbon before, you will. And cigars. Thank you, Michael Reddish. So great ideas are like bourbon. You need dedicated time and space to let them sit, stir, and reach their potential. I also wanted to call out, if you guys were paying attention on, I'm sure you were, on Wednesday with the video that Suzanne shared, the chorus that kept on coming up was just the word listen, listen, listen. How are we doing at listening to the Holy Spirit and just listening for the ideas and the stuff that he wants to give us? Okay, so through this whole thing, I'm going to give a handful of questions after each section, and the idea is don't go crazy trying to write them down. I'll send out the questions afterwards. But it's an idea of giving you some stuff to journal about, and then hopefully maybe even some books to read. Because here at Ramsey, we always need more journal questions than books to read, right? Okay. So, something I've learned that's really helped me is to resist the urge to multitask all the time. Being present in the moment in the main activity I'm doing, especially if it's something that doesn't require full mental attention. Think of all the things where you need to be there mentally, but not totally, right? Like folding the laundry, washing the dishes, waiting in line in the cafeteria, walking the dog, all of those things. So I challenge you to stop listening to podcasts while cooking dinner, checking your phone while you're in line in the cafeteria, and use those moments instead to let the Holy Spirit move and help you put the pieces of your idea together. Next question. What's your relationship like with your smartphone? I mean, if you think about your smartphone as less of like a piece of technology and what like it would be like if it was like your girlfriend, it kind of gets a little messed up, right? So, what if it's like, did you ever have a girlfriend who expected you to reply to every email or message within 5 minutes? Who maybe sometimes followed you in the bathroom, tried to hold your hand while you were looking at you, gentlemen. Yep, that's the way I do it. Taylor and Jackie told me to add more personal stories to this. That wasn't one of them. But seriously, when was the last time you were apart from your phone for more than an hour? Something that's been really helpful for me is what I've started to do is, like my house is 2 stories, like kitchen on the bottom and bedroom on the top. So I leave my phone on the bottom floor when I go to bed. And then I do not touch it or turn it on until I'm leaving for work in the morning. So that means you've got like an hour or so before I go to bed, like at the end of the day, a couple hours at the beginning of the day. And it's been super helpful. It's been so good to just have that quiet space to just like breathe and not be distracted by a million different things. And then finally, what are some of the spaces where I need to keep my phone away and just be present? Okay, next one. Talking about constraints. And to help illustrate this, I'm going to turn to this great strip with Calvin and Hobbes. Yeah. Okay, for those of you who can't read that, I blew it up as much as possible, but I'll read it anyway. Do you have an idea for your story yet? No, I'm waiting for inspiration. You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. What mood is that? Last minute. So, if you've never heard or read Calvin and Hobbes before, I just have to ask, what have you been doing with your whole life? Really? Honestly. Calvin and Hobbes, which is written by Bill Watterson, is some of the most thoughtful, creative storytelling, humor, and art you will ever find in any medium, in my opinion. But besides that, the story of the evolution of his work is a great example of how creativity can flourish under constraint. There's probably very few mediums that have the same level of constraints as a syndicated newspaper comic. You're limited by physical size, the amount of words you can fit, like lack of color, and you have to put something out every day, like 5 days a week and on the weekends, to try to keep people coming back. And so Bill Watterson became known for how he pushed the limits of what the medium was capable of and what the newspapers would let him do, especially with the full color half page. So I want to just show some examples of that. I mean, not there yet. So like this is an example of what he was doing in his early work, right? Like still sort of following the format of like having to have a long day panel and then a short one, etc. But then as he kept going, he started building fun stuff like this. And this. And this. I mean, he just started to really flex his creative muscles, and it was just really fun to watch. So let's go back to the idea of last minute panic. Everyone here has operated under the constraint of a project deadline. Every creative project comes with limitations that we have to operate in, right? Print projects have to be in CMYK. Ugh, color gamut, hate it. Web pages have to work at multiple breakpoints. Ugh, Magnolia, hate it. But how can we learn from Larson's example and operate within the constraints and push past them, push past what we think the limits are? Some more questions. What's a project or idea you've had that feels impossible? Why? One of the things that came up for me in the pandemic was, I mean, we're stuck at home watching a lot of YouTube. And I've always been into photography, but I always sort of felt limited because I didn't have a dedicated studio space, right? Like I'd gone to friends who were pro photographers and they had this glorious space with like 20 ridiculous high ceilings and like great lighting and all of that. And I'm like, well, I can't really do good photography until I have that. Well, guess what? That just kind of holds you back and keeps you safe. And so I ran across this video of this photographer in Manhattan, and he was literally creating these amazing photos in like half of the space of this stage. And it was just kind of this like slap in the face and be like, so what's your excuse now, right? And so we always have these things that are pushing us saying, you can't do that yet. But really, I started to kind of like change my mind to think, maybe instead of this being like something that holds me back, maybe this is a way to move forward. And so one of my many pandemic projects was like turning my home office from just an office into more of a studio space. And I bought some stuff from Seth, who I'm sure is here somewhere, and just started like down that journey and seeing what I could do with what I had. Are any of the limitations of your projects just traditions or conventions? It's just been done this way for so long you don't even question it. And then finally, what are some ways you can look at one of these limitations differently? To go back to the medium comics, I think a lot of times comics gets a bad rap as being like low art and just not really worthy of our critical attention. I want to kind of call out this book by Scott McCloud that I read a handful of years ago, where he really dissects the medium and puts it in a new way. Like for those of us that are involved in video, like that's where the company's going, right? We're putting out more and more video content. Like we just released, or about to release, a documentary that's like, I can't remember, like 2 hours, right? And if you really think about it, there's a lot of great parallels between comic books and video. I mean, in both, you're carefully choosing camera angles, you're choosing like what characters to focus on, you're thinking about like what dialogue to focus on, you can emphasize this and not that. And so if you're at all involved in video production, I highly recommend this book. It'll really challenge how you think about comic books. And it's also in comic book format, so it's not this long academic book, it's actually really fun to read. Okay, let's talk about one of my favorite topics as an Enneagram 3, failure. Earlier I talked about how I hated science in school growing up. And I used to think simply this was because I was like creatively bent and like art's the opposite of science, right? Not so much. I really think now it's more because science is about failure, right? It's about experimentation, it's about trying new things, it's about keep on trying things until you find the right answer. And so, as an Enneagram 3, like I hate failure. And when I'm not in a good place, I run and hide from the possibility of failure. I hate it. So it kind of makes sense that I'd not love science when I was smaller. But let's talk about how we can change how we think about failure. What if we approached failure less like an artist and more like a scientist? A scientist looks at experimentation as normal and necessary as part of the process. Think about what this made me think about was the publishing part of our B2C team. Right now, Chris and Gretchen are working on cover designs for Dave's new book. I'm sure there's no strong feelings about that project, right? Part of the process is working through dozens of concepts, dozens of experiments before landing on the final winning cover. And those early covers aren't really failures. Instead, they're essential steps on the journey to finding the right answer, the winning answer. I think if we're to really win as a creative, we need to be willing to experiment more, which means being willing to fail more, so we can find the answer, even if it takes us 50, 60, 70 covers. Okay, more questions. I know, figured. What's a healthy definition of failure for me? Where's the paid social team? Give me some love. These guys are always failing, right? Split tests. A and B tests, right? I mean, in the good ways. Like it's built in. A-B split test, like the definition of it is one's going to win and one is going to fail, right? But that's the way it works. That's how you get to the winning answer. It's the more effective answer. And that's normal for them. They're not like, I mean, I don't think they're ashamed of that. But that mindset should be normal for me, and it should be normal for all of us. When was the last time I tried something totally new that I wasn't comfortable with, that had a high probability of failure? For me, what I found growing as a creative is when I like throw myself into something and I don't have expectations of doing well at it, it's actually really liberating and fun because I don't have all this pressure. I warned her about this, but where's Joanna Trudeau? Somewhere? Yay, I warned her about this. How many people here went to Battlelands on Friday? Right? So Joanna did this amazing animation for the band Metallic Blush. And what you might not know is that like last year she did animation as well. It was the first time she ever did it. And even last year, like she kicked ass with what she made. And so like this year she kept on pushing and she made something even better. Like that's what it means to like try something new, just like jump out of your comfort zone and like build your skills. And Brian Ray tells me that he's like trying to recruit her and get her down to the first floor and work for him. That's pretty awesome, I think. And then final question. What conditions need to be in place for me to feel safe, to fail? Okay, moving on to the fun part, blue part, the art, the squishy side of creativity. Honestly, I just like the word squishy. Everybody say squishy with me? Squishy. I see why Dave does that, it's kind of a power trip. And since this side of creativity is more elusive, let's kick it off with a subject that always feels difficult to define and understand. I'm talking about creative flow. There's a lot of different definitions out there for flow, but here's my take. Creative flow is what happens when we're doing some of our best creative work. Our ideas are flowing, we're moving from one creative decision to the next, almost effortlessly, and we're operating as much on instinct and intuition as anything else. When we're fully in the flow, it's one of the best feelings in the world, and you find yourself thinking, this is what I was born to do. So, if we can agree that some of our best work happens when we're in the flow, and it feels amazing, then this is the obvious question. How can I experience flow on demand? Like, we kind of see creative flow as being this mysterious, like, elusive, like, oh, it'll happen when it happens, and oh gosh, it's great, but now I might not see it for a couple of weeks. But what makes creative flow difficult to understand is that it's actually a reflection of who we are as a creative. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Each of us are creative, gifted in different ways. And so how we find ourselves in flow is connected to those differences. It's part of our creative identity. So I think the key to understanding our creative flow is understanding ourselves better. So how often do I experience creative flow? I think that question, let's move on to that, is a great barometer for how we're doing as a creative. It's a great barometer for helping us identify what our strengths are and how we're doing. If you can't remember the last time you experienced creative flow while doing your creative work here at Ramsey, I think you should seriously ask yourself if you're operating out of your true strengths. Are you in the right seat on the bus? What creative work do I get lost in that I just love doing, that I believe I was born to do? And here's the flip side. When you really know who you are, what your strengths are, what you love to do, you should be experiencing flow regularly, like multiple times during the week. And I think, to repeat my previous point, let's be more deliberate about understanding what it takes for you to experience creative flow. Like, I've been building different playlists. I've been working in different parts of the building. I've been just trying all these different things, testing out the variables to see what it takes to repeat getting that experience of creative flow. Okay, let's talk about stealing. I know we're supposed to be a Christian company with Christian values and all of that, but I think we need to reconsider our stance on plagiarism. I'm actually serious. Let's first talk about the false idea of originality. Pop culture builds up this idea of the creative genius, someone who's super smart, gifted, talented, and inspiration just hits them over and over again, and they just create brilliant work out of the overflow of that. And they do it over and over again, winning fans, success, opportunity, but there's not really any creatives like that. People who create their work in isolation out of nothing. Because as a wise man once said, and with that in mind, I think it's important that we take a fresh look at a step that usually comes before stealing, and that's copying. This might not be a surprise at this point, but I think copying has been given a bad rap too. If you think about it, when we were kids, we would often unapologetically copy the creative work of others that we admired. Aspiring rock stars would copy their favorite musicians and learn their songs note for note. Wannabe writers would read their favorite books over and over, and then write their own stories inspired by those characters. In my case, I originally wanted to draw comic books someday, so I filled sketchbooks and sketchbooks with drawings, studying the favorite artists that I studied. I think there's real value in copying the work of others to learn from it. So here's my new definition of copying. Copying is recognizing work that challenges you, that you aspire to reach to someday, and temporarily copying the creative approach to learn from it. And then I think the natural step from there is then to move on to stealing. If you've read the book Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon, you know where I'm going with this. And if you haven't, you need to do yourself a favor this weekend and buy it. It's a short little book about this big, it's black. You can probably burn through it in a weekend. And it will kick you in the teeth in the best way possible. Stealing is more about moving on from learning. It's about moving on from learning someone else's technique and style and transforming it into an ignition point for your own work. It's about understanding who you are as a creative, who influences you, challenges you, and running with that as fast as you can. And what people usually think about when they hear the words copying and stealing, well, that's just plagiarism. Okay, so here's some of the questions we talked through. Who are the other creatives in my field whose work I really admire and respect? Who are your creative heroes? Some of them are on these boards, but you should be able to list off who your heroes are, just like that. It's one thing to be able to list off the names, but can you identify and articulate why their work influences you so that you know what aspects of their work you want to copy and steal? And then, have I gone back to childhood and just tried blatantly copying somebody's work to better understand how they made it so you can get better? And finally, am I regularly stealing work the right way to push myself to grow and get better at my craft? Okay, we're getting close to the end. To finish up, here's the closer. Let's talk about how faith should intersect with our creativity. Have you ever had a book that just grabs you by the throat and doesn't let go until the last page? There's been a handful of books like that for me in my life, and I want to close out by talking about one of them. And it's this older book that came out around 2001, which is going to super date me. It's called Roaring Lambs by Bob Reiner. And the Cliff Notes version of this is that Bob basically just says that at that point, especially, Christian culture sucks. Like, a lot of Christian culture at that point was just people like taking what was working out in the world and slapping Jesus on it. It was pathetic and it was cringeworthy every time. We just tended to copy other people, what they were doing, and we're just selling ourselves short. But the main point that really hit me reading this book was that Bob was just saying that, like, if we are children of God, the God that created molecules and mountains, chocolate, blueberries, comic books, all the things, like, we should be the most kick-ass creatives on the planet, right? We have the ability to be as good as each and every single person that you guys have written down on these whiteboards, and better. But how are we doing? How are we doing in actually asking God for inspiration? The very first thing that God talks about in the Bible is it's not about creating. It's the very first thing he tells us about himself. And the very first person that he pours out his spirit on is an artist, is a creator. So I feel like God understands how important creating is, and how important it is to us, and how important it is to his redemptive mission. So I have to ask, how are we doing at asking for divine inspiration in this place? It would be like if we had a meeting brainstorming a new project, and we had each and every person on these boards in that meeting, and we don't ask any of them for their opinion. It would be like we're designing an app, and Steve Jobs steps up, or the ghost of Steve Jobs, and says, hey, I've got an idea. And we're like, we got it, Steve, thanks. Right? Or we're planning like the next documentary, and Steven Spielberg shows up and says, hey, you should try this. And we're like, thanks, Steve, we're good. I mean, that's kind of like overdoing it maybe, but is it? I think we can do so much better. Okay. I just like the word squishy, I'm sorry. I can apologize for that. Okay. So, I had an old pastor that asked this question, and it kind of just stuck with me. Do I behave how I believe? we talk about that we believe that God is the creator, and that God wants to use this place and has plans for this place. But are we really acting that way? Are we really asking him for his help? Are we really urgently, desperately going after that? And finally, do I really believe God can and is willing to use my creativity to help change people's lives? I believe it. I want to believe it. I'm not always doing a great job at that, but at the end of the day, that's what I want to believe. Okay. So we started this talk with this tagline: how do we get better ideas? And all these different points I've been talking about have been part of the answer. But the real answer for us as children of God is actually devastatingly simple. You just have to ask for them. When I was running through an earlier version of this talk, Chris and Jackie asked me afterwards, why are you talking about this? Why is creativity important to you? For me, it's important because ideas are how we change the world. Ideas are how we change people's lives. Ideas are how we introduce people to Jesus. The world needs this to freaking show up, people. The world needs us to be listening for God's ideas, to stop being distracted by all the things that don't matter. The world needs our creativity and our inspiration. Let's do